What's up guys, Asian here again with kind of another Elsweyr video. This is kind of more generic theory crafting, but this is ostensibly focused in around the Elsweyr new set, the new medium armor trial set that was introduced, or I shouldn't say introduced, but kind of revealed, I should say, just a few days ago. With the lifting of the NDA on Elsweyr. So before we get started into the mathematics here, we are in R right now, but I'm going to shift over to my other screen here so you guys can get an idea of the specific set that I'm going to be covering today. So we're going to hop over here to ESO sets. So the set that we're going to be talking about today is going to be where is it? Here it is, Tooth of Lokkestiiz. So this is the medium armor set from Sunspire, which is the trial that's coming out with Elsweyr. Now, when we first introduced Lokkestiiz, there was a lot of hype around this, mainly because of that 5-piece effect. So the 2-piece is weapon damage, the 3-piece is minor slayer, as you would expect from your typical trial set. The 4-piece also adds weapon damage, and now the 5-piece, when you activate a synergy, you gain Major Slayer for 15 seconds. Now, a lot of people latched onto this immediately, especially with the kind of realization that Necromancers have what's called a self-synergy, so they can use a synergy they can activate themselves, so they basically get one free synergy. Combine that with Orbs from a healer, and you could potentially get 100% uptime on Major Slayer this way. You just need 2 synergies in order to get 100% uptime on Major Slayer for yourself. Now, what I thought of was not necessarily the fact that, oh, I can get 100% Major Slayer on just myself. I am also thinking about, well, what about the other Major Slayer sets in the game, Master Architect and War Machine? Those 2 sets right now are the Master Architect is the light armor set, medium armor set is War Machine. Those 2 sets are from Halls of Fabrication, which is from the Morrowind expansion. So these 2 sets are almost 2 years old at this point now. But those 2 sets currently are the only sources of Major Slayer in the game. They definitely act differently than Tooth of Lokkestiiz. So Major Slayer from Master Architect and War Machine lasts for 10 seconds whenever you use an ultimate. Plus, you also give this Major Slayer bonus to 2 of your closest allies. So a lot of groups right now have 1 or 2 or 3 Major Slayer sets. So it's typically going to be either Magicka Nightblades or Stamina Nightblades that are running either Master Architect or War Machine respectively. So that is the set that I really want to take a comparison to. Is it more beneficial to have 100% uptime on one person with Tooth of Lokkestiiz, or is it more beneficial to be running War Machine or Master Architect instead? You will have lower Major Slayer uptime, but you will also be giving this Major Slayer to potentially 2 other DPS, assuming that you're able to sort of coordinate your groups appropriately so that your DPS are going to be getting that Major Slayer bonus from War Machine or Master Architect. So that is the big question we're going to be trying to answer today. So moving back over to R now. So right here, I made a couple of assumptions here when I decided to go about doing this sort of comparison. So the first thing is, obviously, we're going to have made Minor Slayer up. We're assuming that we're using either War Machine or Tooth of Lokkestiiz. So both of these sets do have Minor Slayer attached to them. So that's why we have this 0.05. So we're assuming that we always have Minor Slayer up. The other buff that we're assuming that we always have up is going to be Minor Berserk. Now, of course, there are I want to say rumors right now because it hasn't been confirmed by a dev yet, that Minor Berserk is being removed from Stamina Nightblade's Relentless Focus and Merciless Resolve. But we're going to be assuming that our 2 healers are going to be really, really on top of their Combat Prayer game, and we're able to get full Minor Berserk uptime. That's where the 0.08 comes from. The 0.13 comes from 13% additional damage from the Mighty CP. Now, of course, this might change depending on your specific CP setup. So, for example, if you're going with 2 Sharpened, then you probably have enough CPs to get 64 points into Mighty, maybe 56. If you have Nerd and Sharpened, then you might not have enough to get 13%. You might be dropping down to 11% instead, so 49 to Mighty instead. But for the sakes of just comparisons, we're going to be sticking with 13%, but of course this could vary depending on your specific CP setup. And then obviously we want to include Major Slayer. So Major Slayer is 15% additional damage, so this is where the 0.15 comes in. Now I'm not taking consideration Mastered Arms and Thaumaturge, because those two percentages might be different. And typically speaking, even if you're a magic DPS or stamina DPS, these two values are definitely going to be different. For magic DPS, you definitely have not a lot into Thaumaturge compared to Mastered Arms, and likewise for stamina DPS, while they will be a little bit closer, it's not going to be exactly the same. Plus, there might be unequal distributions of direct damage versus damage over time. So we're not including Mastered Arms or Thaumaturge in these specific calculations. But if we were to include them, they would change the values a little bit here. So on the top, this first line here is basically if we're running Tooth of Lokkestiiz and we're getting 100% uptime on Major Slayer that way. The bottom one here is if we are using War Machine or Master Architect. Now, if you are in Nightblade, you can typically get anywhere between 40 to 50% uptime on Major Slayer, depending on how quickly you're able to get your ultimate up and how quickly you're able to use it. If you're able to get the siphoning passive off every 8 seconds, that increases your passive ultimate generation to 3.5 seconds, which means in theory you should be able to get 50% uptime on Major Slayer from running Master Architect or War Machine. Now obviously this is not going to be the case. Typically speaking, it's going to be a little bit lower because you typically will want to at the very least finish off your front bar, and it really depends on when you're able to actually use your ultimate and things like that. And in more organized groups you might be calling off your ultimates, so closer to 40 to 45% is typically what you would see from Major Slayer, from War Machine, and Master Architect. So that's where we have the 0.15 times the uptime of 0.4, so 40% uptime is the uptime that I'm assuming. Now I've kind of already went over this in the video looking at major vulnerability, but just for a review, if this equation here is basically the same as figuring out percentage differences. So again, percentage differences is going to be final minus initial divided by initial. So if we just do a little bit of basic algebra here, we know that the quantity final minus initial divided by initial is equal to final over initial minus initial over initial. Now, obviously initial over initial, they both cancel out because they're the same number, so this becomes final over initial minus 1, and that is where this equation comes in. So this is our final damage done bonus, and this is our initial damage done bonus, and then we subtract 1. So this should give us the percentage increase in damage that we should expect to see if we have 100% uptime on Major Slayer. So this would be if we're running Tooth of Lokkestiiz. Now here, this is our final, this is our initial, and then we have our minus 1 here. Now I'm multiplying this entire quantity by 3 because we're able to give Major Slayer to 3 other DPS, or I should say 2 other DPS. So we have ourselves, which is 1, and then 2 other DPS, so that's 3 possible people who are able to get this buff. So we need to multiply this by 3 to get a rough approximation of the damage increase we can see. Of course, this is not necessarily going to be exact because, again, CPs do vary from build to build. Even people who are running the exact same DPS class might have different CPs depending on whether they're running double sharpened, learn sharpened, whether they're running the lover, things like that. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to assume that everybody's running the exact same build, getting the exact same buffs, the exact same uptimes. So we're going with 3 here. So go ahead and run these 2 lines here. So with Tooth of Lokkestiiz, we can expect just under 12% increase in damage done from Major Slayer. This is to be expected because of the additive nature of all of these buffs. A 15% increase in actuality is going to be a little bit weaker. Now, what about from War Machine and Master Architect? So 3 people getting the Major Slayer buff from War Machine or Master Architect will see about a 14.3% increase in damage done between all 3 of them. So this basically tells me that War Machine and Master Architect should be a little bit stronger than Tooth of Lokkestiiz. Now, of course, this does rely on the assumption that we're able to get 40% Major Slayer uptime and that we're able to consistently get this on our DPS. Basically, the healers and the tanks are not, quote-unquote, stealing this Major Slayer buff. But, of course, we know that's not always going to be the case. There are going to be instances where the tank or the healers might end up taking that Major Slayer buff. So the next question is, what is that break-even point between War Machine and Tooth of Lokkestiiz? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to be setting these 2 values equal to each other. So and we are going to take a couple of things here. So for starters, we're going to take this value here, so 1 plus 0.05 plus 0.08 plus 0.13, we're going to turn that into just one variable because these are constants. So we're just going to turn it into x. So that makes this following statement. So we do have our, so we're going to be using this value here. So we're just going to round up to 12%. Then we're going to be setting this equal to here. So written out, this would be 3 times, again, we're changing this to 1, to x, I should say, and then we're keeping our major slayer there, and we need to multiply it by the break-even basic percentage uptime. So this would become a new variable, y. Then we're going to divide this entire thing by x. Then we need to subtract 1. And then we need to set this equal to 0.12. Now we just do a little bit of algebra here. So we divide 0.12 by 3 to get rid of the 3 on the left-hand side. And this gives us x plus 0.15 times y divided by x minus 1 equal to 0.04. Now we add 1 to each side, so now we have x plus 0.15 times y divided by x is equal to 1.04. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to basically do a little bit more algebra here and basically split up that divide by x. So very similar to final minus initial that we did up here, we can split this up into 2 terms. So we can have x over x plus 0.15 times y over x is equal to 1.04. Now the x over x is obviously canceled out, so we have 1. Oops. We have 1 plus 0.15 times y over x. Oops. Not mean to hit the Windows button there. Over x is equal to 1.04. You obviously want to subtract that 1. So we have 0.15 times y over x is equal to 0.04. And now we just divide 0.04 by 0.15. So I will be using our console over here because I can't exactly do that on my head. Then we have y over x is equal to 0.267. We're going to round up to the nearest 3 decimal points here. And so y, as you guys might remember from up here, this is our uptime on major slayers. This is the value that we're interested in. X is our damage done modifiers, the summation of all of our damage done modifiers before we include major slayer. So if we just take x from here, this is equal to 1.26. So we allow x to equal 1.26, and this gives us y divided by 1.26 is equal to 0.267. We multiply by 1.26 so as to get our y. So y is equal to, and we're going to go down to the console here, 1.26 times 0.267. And that gives us a total percentage uptime of 0.336 or 33.6% uptime. So this is going to be the break-even point. If we are able to get lower than this value here, then that means Tooth of Lokkestiiz is going to be stronger for overall DPS. If our uptimes are going to be higher than this, then that means War Machine or Master Architect is going to be stronger for group DPS overall. So 33.6%, this is possible to do. It might seem fairly high, but if you have 2 or 3 major Slayer sets going in group, it is possible to get some above this value. A lot of the very high-end rating guilds like Hodor, Symbolic, Valor, their DPS are capable of probably getting around 35 to 45% major Slayer uptime because they are so organized. In slightly less organized groups, so for example, progression style guilds or perhaps beginner guilds, this value is going to be a little bit more difficult to reach because it does require a little bit of situational awareness from everybody involved. It does require people to be in their respective stacks in order to get the buff. So this might not be as easy to meet for those guilds there. But generally speaking, it does seem like War Machine and Master Architect, at the very least for higher end guilds, will be stronger than Tooth of Lokkestiiz. Now, of course, these are all mathematical figures. We need to obviously test this on the PTS once it goes live in 2 to 3 weeks. I should say when it goes live on April 15th, to really know whether Tooth of Lokkestiiz is going to be stronger or not. So I will hopefully be able to get people from Mayflower and potentially Hellfire Dominion to help me test out whether Tooth of Lokkestiiz or running War Machine is going to be stronger for overall DPS. Of course, these sets might also be changed in the near future as well. And another caveat is, of course, that we're assuming we're able to get 100% uptime on Tooth of Lokkestiiz. Basically, we're going to have 2 synergies and we're able to basically maintain those 2 synergies so that we can get 100% uptime. Obviously, if we have lower than 100% uptime, then this Y value is going to decrease accordingly. And obviously, if we have more damage modifiers, so again, this is a very conservative number because we are not including Master at Arms or Thaumaturge, then this value will also increase. So if we say, let's say we have 20% in Master at Arms and Thaumaturge, so it doesn't really matter at all because it has the exact same percentage point, then this becomes 1.46. And if we do 1.46 times 0.267, then that becomes 38.9% uptime, just under 39% uptime for that break-even point. So the more damage done modifiers you have before Major Slayer, the greater uptime you need on Major Slayer in order to beat Tooth of Lokkestiiz. So there's a lot of caveats here, and ultimately it will be basically dependent on DPS testing on the PTS to really basically be able to say for certainty which one's going to be better. And of course, it also is going to be dependent on basically stamina Nightblades and magic Nightblades still being desired in trials. Of course, for progression style guilds, for basically the guilds that are not running for score or for speed, this is obviously doesn't matter. You basically can play whatever class you want. But for guilds like Hodor, Symbolic, Valor, Odyssey potentially, they may or may not be phasing out Nightblades for Necromancers, depending on how strong the Necromancers are in comparison to Nightblades, in which case it basically becomes no question. You can't really use War Machine or a Master Architect on a Stamina Necromancer or a Magic Necromancer, respectively. So in this case, this entire video just basically gets thrown out the window. So there's a lot of assumptions that are being made here, a lot of caveats, and unfortunately we will not be able to get a very clear picture until the PTS goes live on April 15th. But overall, I can say that this set is definitely very interesting, and I'm very excited to see whether or not this will end up replacing some of the meta sets currently in the game for Stamina DPS. I do want to compare this not only to War Machine and Master Architect, but also to Advanced Yokeda and Reliquin. So that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.